Okay. Proverbs chapter 14, verse 34. Righteousness exalts a nation, but sin is a reproach to any people. Today, by the grace of God, we shall start a series, may take 2 or 3 weeks, looking at a new nation. A new nation. We want to look at Nigeria historically as well as scripturally. Without doubt, there is none of us listening to this message that is happy with the condition of Nigeria. Not one of us. If anybody says he's happy with the way Nigeria is, the fellow is not telling the truth. Almost everything good that a nation could have has collapsed. It is so bad, the country has become the poverty capital of the world. Recently, some figures were released into the public domain about the level of poverty in Nigeria. And 133 million people are classified poor in a country that has abundant mineral resources. And the poverty is all over the country. The highest zone is the Northwest with 45.5 million people, while the Northeast has 20 million people. And it goes on and on like that. The South, 19 million. The Southwest, 15 million. The Southeast, 10 million. Poor people in Nigeria. The cost of food is excessively high. A bag of rice costs more than the minimum wage. In addition to that, there is bloodshed all over the country. Thousands upon thousands of people are being killed. It has become a daily thing now. Death no longer shocks Nigerians. In the midst of it, some criminals arose and started kidnapping people, traumatizing families, dehumanizing people, and stripping them of their wealth. There are families that have had to sell all their properties, all their assets, to pay ransom to some kidnappers. According to the Nigeria Bureau of Statistics, in 1 year, Nigerians paid 2.2 trillion naira as ransom to kidnappers, which means kidnapping has become more lucrative than oil and gas. That's the reason it is not reducing, it's not abating. And then you have government that does not perform at optimum best. Government that daily violates the Constitution. Because Section 14, Paragraph 2b of the Constitution says the welfare and the security of the people shall be the primary purpose of government. In the past 12 years, it is clear the welfare and the security of the people are not the primary purpose of those in power. Under the circumstances, every reasonable, every sensible Nigerian is praying for a new nation, a new Nigeria, irrespective of religious affiliation. Everybody is believing God for a new Nigeria, that this country will turn around for good. Those who could not take what is going on in Nigeria have left the country. Some sold everything they have to raise money to leave the country. Some get to where they are going to the destination, they only found menial jobs waiting. To come back home becomes a problem, because there is nothing to come back to. They've sold everything. The situation it's not palatable. So we want to look at a new nation. How will it come forth? But for us to be able to do that, we should first and foremost look back and ask ourselves, if we are looking for a new nation, what happened to the old one? How did the old one collapse to the extent that there is scarcely any government institution in Nigeria today that is functioning in righteousness, in integrity, in accountability? I'm not sure of one. Almost all the institutions of governance in Nigeria has collapsed, compromised, corrupted. Bribery and corruption is no longer being hidden. It has become an entitlement for civil servants, for government officials, for security officers, even in the private sector, in the banks, in the insurance companies, in the schools, including the universities and polytechnics. Nobody hides it. They ask for it openly. And they tell you, for us to do this for you, this is how much it is going to cost you. The person telling you this is how much it will cost you is an employee collecting salary every month. But he will still tell you, this is how much you will pay me before I will do my job. Now, if we want to understand what happened to Nigeria, then we need to go to the foundation of Nigeria. The Bible says righteousness exalts a nation, but sin is a reproach to any people. Nigeria was not formed in righteousness. Those who built Nigeria did so out of wicked, selfish, and self-centered motives. They were not thinking of the people. The colonial masters, the British colonial masters, were not concerned with the progress of Nigeria, but with their own treasury. Right from the onset, you probably will have heard historically that somebody sold the portion of land called Nigeria to the British Crown for about 800,000 pounds or so in those days. It was a trading company that sold what does not belong to it to the British Crown. And Britain started administering the geographical location called Nigeria as two protectorates, the Northern Protectorate as well as the Southern Protectorate. Now, the Southern Protectorate was buoyant. It was earning money and it was having surplus at the end of each year. The Northern Protectorate, on the other hand, was always in deficit. And each year, the British Crown will have to grant it assistance, subsidy, every year. After a while, the British Crown got tired because that was not what they wanted. They came to loot. They came to steal. They came to appropriate what is not theirs. They had no intention of spending their money to be funding any colony. So Lord Lugard came up with this sick idea, very, very sick idea, that let them merge the Northern Protectorate and the Southern Protectorate so that the surplus of the Southern Protectorate will be used to fund the deficit of the Northern Protectorate. So, they came up with the idea of the amalgamation. And from the amalgamation, the crisis that we have today started. And I'm going to be sharing some information with us. I'm going to share the screen. I'm going to read excerpts from some publications for us to understand the mindset of those who established Nigeria, who founded Nigeria as a country. And when you view it in relation to what is going on today, you will discover that Nigeria was built from scratch to be corrupt. That foundation of corruption has been with us now for 111 years. 111 years. 1914 to 2025. We have not destroyed that foundation of corruption. At a colonial dinner in 1913, a colonial official called Lord Harcourt, it was from his name that the city Port Harcourt came from. So you know the spelling of the Harcourt. It was Lord Harcourt. So they called the city Port Harcourt. That wasn't the name of that city initially. I think Port Harcourt's original name was Ugwocha, or something like that. Now, let me find the document and then I will display it and I will read it out for us to understand where we are coming from so that we can be able to know what we are supposed to do. We are doing this teaching as part of the efforts to prepare the church for engagement of political issues in Nigeria. One major problem that we have with most Christians is that they believe that politics is not something Christians should engage in. I used to think so too, until God opened my eyes to understand Isaiah chapter 9 verse 6, that unto us a child is born, and unto us a son is given, and the government shall be upon his shoulder. Government is upon the shoulder of Christ. Christ is the head. The shoulder is the body. And the church is the body of Christ. So what God is telling us is that government, the responsibility for governance is resting upon the church. And until the Christians in Nigeria realize this, until the Christians in Nigeria accept the responsibility, Nigeria will continue to remain the way that it is. We shall talk a little bit more about prophecies that is telling us that the year 2027 is decisive for the emancipation of Nigeria. Now, as you can see on the screen, at a colonial service dinner in 1913, Lord Harcourt, the then Secretary of State of the colonies, summarized in a humorous metaphor the dependence of northern Nigeria on the British Treasury for sustenance. The North was dependent on the British Treasury for sustenance. When he said, and I quote exactly what he said at that colonial dinner in 1913, 114 years ago. We have released northern Nigeria from the leading strings of the treasury. The promising and well-conducted youth is now on an allowance on his own and is about to effect an alliance with the southern lady of means. I have issued the special license, and Sir Frederick Lugard will perform the ceremony. May the union be fruitful and the couple constant. The Nigerians are not designed to be a great trust, but a great federation. Now let's analyze this statement. He referred to northern Nigeria as promising and well-conducted youth, because whatever the British wanted, they will do. In the South, the Southerners are educated, they've gone to school, they are engineers, there are doctors, there are lawyers, they will argue with them. But in the North, it is yes, sir. So the British colonialists refer to them as the well-conducted youth. Is now on an allowance. Now please note that word allowance. Is now on an allowance. So when you are complaining that the Amayanabo in Rivers State does not have an oil well of its own, but every emir in the north, that is the complaint, have oil wells, that the oil in the Niger Delta is being controlled by some northerners. It is because you did not understand the foundation upon which Nigeria was built. Everything you have in the South was designed to be an allowance for them in the North. It's an allowance. So it's a case of you are working, they are eating. That is why Kano State was divided into two. Into Kano and Jigawa. And between the two of them, they control about 78 local governments. Meanwhile, Lagos, that has more population than the two of them, Lagos has only 20 local governments. Bayelsa, where the money is coming from, has 8 local governments. So when they are distributing money at the end of every month from the federation account, the combination of Kano and Jigawa will have allocation for over 70 local governments. Lagos will have for 20, Bayelsa will have for 8. Because it's an allowance. Then the statement goes on, is about to effect an alliance with a southern lady of means, which means they were conducting a marriage between the north and the south, in which the north is the husband and the south is the wife. And of course, in a marriage, the husband controls the resources. It is on this platform that Nigeria was built. And that was what started what is called harem politics. Harem. You know harem, H-A-R-E-M. When a man, particularly amongst the Muslims, when they will have many wives and keep them locked up inside the house, the man has harem of wives. So in Nigeria, there is something called harem politics. And harem politics is based on DAR, divide and rule. A man who wants peace in his marriage will play one wife against the other. A man who has many wives will play one wife against another wife. The wives will be fighting themselves. They will not fight him. So there is this metaphor about Nigeria that in 1914, the North was given one wife. By 1939, the wives were increased to 2. In 1939, the South was divided into East and West. Then in 1963, the wives were increased to 3 when the Midwestern region was formed. And if you look at the politics of Nigeria, throughout that entire period, the North was not divided. And yet, the North was larger in land space than the South and has more different ethnic nationalities. But the North was not divided. The North remained one unit, one block. But the South was divided. And with the guidance of the British, the North was playing the East against the West, playing the Yorubas against the Igbos against the Yoruba, and that harem politics is still going on till today. Till today. The Yorubas and the Igbos. The Igbos will not agree with the Yorubas. The Yorubas will not agree with the Igbos. The Edo will say, Edo not be Lagos. You can't do it here. Edo will say they are not Yoruba, even though they are Oba collects his authority from Ile-Ife. It is divide and rule. It is harem politics. So long as the South is not united, the Northern oligarchy will continue to rob them and to steal them blind. Whatever they have as resources will be carted away by the North. That has been the story of Nigeria since 1914. As we are approaching another election cycle, the Southerners need to understand that their deliverance lies in first and foremost their unity. And then they should strike unity with the middle belt that their eyes are now opened, that they are not northerners, but they are being manipulated as political pawns. If they form that unity, they have the possibility of linking up with the Hausas. The Hausas too have discovered, their eyes too have opened, that listen, there is nothing called Hausa Fulani. Hausa is Hausa, Fulani is Fulani. It is the Fulani that is the well-conducted youth that the British was referring to. Everything about politics in Nigeria was designed by the British to make sure that the Fulani retain control of the country on behalf of the British Crown. When the amalgamation was done in 1914, opinions differed about its effectiveness. And I'm going to read again two quotes. One from Frederick Lugard himself, one from Frederick Lugard, and one from another colonial civil servant based in Lagos. Now, this information that I'm going to mention next may be useful for those who will know what to do with it. When Nigeria was still protectorate, before the amalgamation, and you have the Northern Protectorate and you have the Southern Protectorate, they both had different colonial officers. They were reporting directly to the Crown. The Southern colonial officers were reporting to Britain directly. The Northern colonial officers were reporting to Britain directly. Now, both of them were at war. They were not united at all. There was so much rivalry, antagonism, and competition between them. So, when the amalgamation was announced, the colonial servants in Lagos did not support it. They saw through what Lugard was trying to do. They resisted, but the Home Office was interested in the arithmetics. They didn't want to be sending money to the North again. And there was money in the South. So as far as the Home Office was concerned, the money in the South should be used to fund the deficit in the North. So Lugard boasted and said, I trust, this is the statement that I am looking for. Lugard said, I trust that as one united country, Nigeria will increase in prosperity and wealth, and its people in happiness. He made this statement on New Year's Day, 1st January 1994. That was 1914, rather. 1914. When the amalgamation was announced. Ian Nicholson, another colonial officer in Lagos, responded and said, the plan of Lugard, that is the amalgamation, he described it as trampling on all the carefully nursed seedlings of civilized government, law, and legislature, and substituting authoritarian administocracy in which the whole emphasis was away from the coast, that is the south, away from the law, and education in its widest sense, and concludes that Lugard's amalgamation places Nigeria in a state of arrested development. Please note that last statement. Lugard's amalgamation places Nigeria in a state of arrested development. What is Nigeria experiencing today? Arrested development. Development that is not going anywhere. It is arrested. It was arrested in 1914, 111 years ago. It didn't start now. Nigeria was meant to be in a perpetual state of arrested development. It won't go anywhere until the Yorubas and the Igbos stop playing harem politics, acting like two jealous wives of the same husband, and unite. If those two ethnic nationalities do not unite to deliver Nigeria from the hands of the Fulani, Nigeria will remain in a state of arrested development. After the amalgamation, let's read 6 months after the amalgamation, the Times of Nigeria, that the one that now became the Daily Times of Nigeria, wrote an editorial concerning the amalgamation. And the Times says, I will read it out, you can see it on the screen again. The amalgamation of 1914 is, broadly speaking, the conquest and subjugation of southern Nigeria by northern Nigeria. Northern Nigerian system, northern Nigerian laws, northern Nigerian land laws, northern Nigerian administration must be made to supersede every system in southern Nigeria. This was written in June 1914. A newspaper editorial. Nigerians should realize that at the back of the colonialist mind, North refers to Islam, while South refers to Christianity. North is a term adopted to indicate cultural, political, and religious domination in Nigeria. That mindset is still prevalent till today. The good thing about the Yorubas and the Igbos is that both ethnic nationalities have a large Christian population. Both of them. So the question is, why hasn't the Christians been able to forge political unity and deliver their country and deliver their land and deliver their people? This challenge is pointing at Christians. Why hasn't Christians done it? We take just one point and then we close for today. Like I said, it may take us about 2 or 3 Sundays. Remember that last statement that we made, that Nigerians should understand that at the back of the colonialist's mind, north refers to Islam, while south refers to Christianity. So when you see Islam beginning to dominate or dominating the politics of Nigeria, it is not by mistake. It is not because the Muslims are better strategists than the Christians. It only tells you, if you understand the history, that Nigeria was programmed by the British to be Islamic. Even though Britain was a Christian country, Britain saw Nigeria as an Islamic nation and promoted Muslims to hold political power over Nigeria. Today we have Boko Haram, bandits, Ansaru, Al-Qaeda, Islamic State, West African Province, all manners of terrorists operating in Nigeria. Generally, they are classified as jihadists. That there is jihad in Nigeria. The jihad that is troubling us today started in 1975. It was launched in 1975 by General Murtala Muhammad. In fact, if Murtala Muhammad had not died in that coup of Dimka, that failed coup of Dimka, you should have forget the story. Nigeria will have been officially, in everything, an Islamic nation. Murtala Muhammad will have done it. When he became head of state, after the overthrow of General Gowon in 1975, the first notable act of Murtala Muhammad was to conduct a purge of the civil service. Why? Because the civil service was dominated by Christians. They were the ones who went to school. They were the ones who were educated. So, they gained employment into the civil service. And they ran a professional bureaucracy for Nigeria. Murtala Muhammad discovered if he was to take over government effectively, compromise it, and weaken the influence of the Christians in power, he had to start from the government machinery. So, he said he was conducting a purge of the civil service, and in one day, he dismissed 10,000 career civil servants. 10,000. You can check it out. It's historical. There was an uproar immediately. So he set up a panel of inquiry. That panel of inquiry was headed by Monsignor Pedro Martins. Monsignor Pedro Martins was the director of Army Chaplaincy. It was the Army Chaplain then. And Monsignor Pedro Martins made enquiries, held hearings, investigated, and wrote his report. And his report said 90% of those who were dismissed did not deserve to be dismissed. So what he was saying is that 9,000 of the people that were dismissed did nothing wrong. They were not supposed to be dismissed. For producing that report, Murtala Muhammad dismissed Pedro Martins from the army. Immediately. for producing that report. Now, let's read what Chief Philip Asiodu said. Chief Philip Asiodu was interviewed in Vanguard newspaper on 10 and 11th August 2015. And a quote from what Chief Asiodu said. He was a senior civil servant, so he should know what happened. Let me highlight it again for us to see on the screen. He said, the debacle of 1975, when 10,000 people were asked to retire or dismissed within 2 months, was unfortunate. That act was quite unjust because there were procedures in the civil service for discipline. Later on, when the late Monsignor Pedro Martin was asked to look into the cases of the dismissals, his report said that 90% of those dismissed did not deserve dismissals. Unquote. That was an eyewitness. That the people that were dismissed did not deserve to be dismissed. After Murtala Mohammed dismissed them, he replaced them with who? With people transferred from local government service of the North. They were mainly Muslims. He got rid. Murtala got rid of all the Christian professionals in the civil service, of most of the Christian professionals in the civil service, and replaced them with people from local government service of the North, who were mainly Muslims. The consequence of what Murtala Mohammed did is what we are grappling with today as corruption in Nigeria. You see, because in those days, there wasn't corruption in the civil service. It wasn't rampant. In fact, you will scarcely come across a civil servant in 1975, in 1974, that will demand a bribe before doing his work. You will rarely find it. They face their work. The civil servants in those days were professionals. They were career civil servants. They collect their salaries. They live in government quarters. If he was entitled to a vehicle, he will ride official vehicle, and then he waits for his retirement. He works until retirement. At his retirement, he collects his gratuity, builds his retirement home, and is settled for life. When Murtala Mohammed dismissed them, he threw them out. People who were living in government quarters suddenly had no accommodation. The civil servant who was riding a car suddenly had no vehicle. Many of them died of heart attack. Those who survived that purge now put their brain into overdrive, that they must put something aside for the rainy day. That was how corruption entered the civil service. Today, some of the greatest thieves in Nigeria are civil servants. They don't hide it. It has become institutionalized. There is an entitlement mentality to bribery taking now in the civil service. They will tell you, before we can do this for you, you will pay 50,000 naira. It is the man's job. Before your file can move from this table to that next table, based on the contract you want, you will have to pay 200,000 naira, or else your file is not going anywhere. Murtala Mohammed started it. Today, he is regarded as a hero because Nigerians don't know their history. Two problems that Nigeria has today: corruption and mediocrity. Corruption entered through what Murtala Mohammed did. Mediocrity followed it. Because the people that he brought from the north to come and take over the position of permanent secretary, director in the civil service, operations manager in the civil service, senior career bureaucrat, they are bad to Renchi. They were working in the local government. And you brought them from the local government to federal civil service. Most of them could hardly read and write English. And yet they are the ones who will sign off on the work that a report that a PhD holder in the civil service has written. So everybody started doing the work wishy-washy. Today, whatever is done in Nigeria is mediocre. There is mediocrity in almost everything that is done in Nigeria. That is why Nigerians would prefer to buy made in Togo, made in Benin Republic, rather than buy any product made in Nigeria. That is why made in China is selling. Not to talk of made in Germany, made in Italy, made in USA. But made in Nigeria, Nigerians don't want to buy it because Nigerians themselves know that what is produced here locally is not up to standard. Mediocrity. It wasn't so. In the 70s, the best electrical cables in the world were manufactured in Nigeria. The best. If you wanted cable, electrical cable that will not overheat, will not melt, people will tell you, I want the one that is made in Ibadan by that cable company in Ibadan. They make very good cables. Whatever they produce in Nigeria, quality, the mediocrity setting. And that is what we are grappling with today. All the problems that we have today have their foundation in the past. So when we are talking about a new Nigeria, we should try and look back. What happened to the old Nigeria? So that we can avoid the pitfalls, the problems, the actions that brought us to where we are today. We'll stop here for today. We will continue next week Sunday by the grace of God and look at the role of the church. A generation of Christian leaders that made a bad situation worse and further compounded political problems with spiritual problems. And we have to unravel all this, not just for our sake, but for the sake of our children and generations yet to come, if the Lord tarries. But let no one be in mind, let no one be in doubt, rather, it is going to be well with Nigeria. Everything that we are sharing is to prepare ourselves for what we are supposed to do next, so that we can have a clear mind about the steps we are supposed to take and what we are supposed to do and what we are grappling with. May the Lord grant us grace as we continue, and in the name of Jesus, the new Nigeria will come forth. We shall continue next week Sunday, if the Lord tarries. God bless you all. Let us pray.